Hey guys, what's going on? Megan here. Here are 20 signs that you will build muscle fast. 20 signs that you have elite muscle building genetics. And before I start, remember, do not use genetics as an excuse to not train hard. You guys know how much I cannot stand the black pill movement. So please do not use this list as a cop-out. The importance of knowing your genetics is to simply know what careers to focus in, what careers to avoid, and in case you have bad genetics, how to use the environment, use your diet, use your training to overcompensate for the areas in which you lack. That's all it is. At the end of the day, whether you have good or bad genetics, you still have to play with the hands you were dealt. And like I always say, somebody with quote unquote bad genetics who trains hard, who's consistent for years, is going to look better than somebody with great genetics who sits on his ass all day and does nothing, for the most part. All right, let's get started. Well, let's start with the most obvious one. If you have myostatin deficiencies, if you have polymorphisms in your follistatin gene, activin 2B receptors, anything that has to do with the myostatin pathway, obviously that's Saiyan / broadly genetics. Case is closed. Everything that has to do with muscle growth, muscle hypertrophy, boils down to the myostatin pathway. Watch my huge playlist on myostatin if you want more details. Next, naturally high testosterone levels. If you have naturally elevated testosterone levels without having to do much, that's going to put you in Hanma genetics. Believe it or not, that's not going to put you at the top. It's not going to put you in broadly saying genetics, and I'm going to explain why later on. So high baseline testosterone levels, great. But like I always say, it's not all about testosterone. It's about your net androgen status, especially your androgen receptor sensitivity and density. Remember, you could have 2,000 nanogram per deciliter testosterone levels, but if your androgen receptors don't work, you literally come out looking like a woman. And I'm not exaggerating. Next, if you have a skinny fat body, right? If you're naturally skinny fat, I'm sorry, but that puts you in Smeagol genetics, right? That is by far the worst phenotype for anyone trying to maximize muscle growth. But remember, like I always say, it's not impossible. It just means you're going to have to train a lot harder, and you're going to have to be a lot more strict with your diet. You're also going to have to really take your testosterone levels very seriously, because testosterone is pretty much the antidote for having a skinny fat body. Remember, guys, I was skinny fat as growing up, and I was still able to reach all of my goals back when I was bodybuilding. I was able to achieve a six-pack. I was able to bench 315 for reps. I was able to squat 405 for reps. I was able to accomplish every single one of my goals, despite having one of the worst genetics ever. So do not use that as an excuse. All right, next, being naturally skinny. Believe it or not, that's basic. By the way, I can't say my favorite word anymore. So that's basic N-word genetics, right? Basic dude genetics. People thought I was going to rank it lower, but no, believe it or not, being naturally skinny is not a bad thing. In fact, a lot of jacked natural people that I know, even the ones that were hands, they were naturally skinny. It's actually a blessing, because you don't have to worry about skinny fat syndrome. You don't have to worry about storing body fat in unwanted places. Also, people who are naturally skinny naturally have fast metabolisms. Again, they don't store fat as much as other people. So it's actually a blessing. So skinny guys out there, be happy. All you got to do is train hard and obviously eat consistently. Next, having great insertions. Believe it or not, that's just basic dude genetics, man. There's nothing magical about having great origins and insertions. Again, all it does is it makes the muscle that you actually build look better, right? But at the end of the day, you still got to build that muscle. Another benefit of having great insertions is even before you start working out, your muscles tend to pop out, right? They tend to look better. But again, that does nothing to directly contribute to faster muscle growth. It does affect your leverages, though. Next, being good at explosive sports. So let's say you were good at explosive sports when you were younger, or if you already young then right now, then that's Hanma genetics, right? That's a great sign that you will build muscle fast, mainly because in order to be good at explosive sports, you need to have the right proportion, the right balance of type 2 fast twitch muscle fibers. Next, being resistant to pain. So having good pain sensitivity. So that means having the right balance of your dopamine receptors, your endorphin receptors, everything that involves pain sensitivity, which obviously is largely genetic. That is one of the most underrated traits in bodybuilding. And that goes in the Saiyan / broadly genetics category. Guys, if you're resilient to pain, most people don't even know that that's a largely genetic trait. But if you're resilient to pain, you could overcome for so many negative genetics. You can build an amazing physique in half the time, simply because what no one wants to admit in bodybuilding is that building muscle is painful. It's not cute. It's not fun. It is painful. Training hard is painful. Getting a maximum pump is painful. Getting a maximum stretch is painful. Lifting heavy is painful. So those of us who are out there and are able to train consistently for years, I don't care what the rest of your genetics looks like, be happy because you were blessed with resilience. I can't tell you how many people I know who actually have good muscle building genetics, but quit lifting simply because they are very, very, very sensitive to pain. Right? They do one set of bench or one set of squat and they're ready to go home, right? And then they complain about the soreness the next day. Whereas the rest of us, we actually love the soreness. So that's definitely one of the most underrated aspects of building muscle. Next, being insulin sensitive, right? So that means you can process carbohydrates better. You can eat a crap ton of carbs and still be ready to go in the next 1 or 2 hours. That is a cheat code, right? That puts you in Hanma genetics. People that are insulin resistant have a very hard time putting on muscle for obvious reasons. Insulin not only plays a role in shuttling glucose into the cells, but also shuttling amino acids into the cells for muscle protein synthesis. So if you insulin resistant, you got to fix that, right? The beauty of it is that, again, like everything that's genetic, you can make up for it with proper training, proper diet, because everything in life is part genetic, part environment. That's also why I have a no excuse mentality, right? If you got screwed in the genetic department, well, you can make up for it in the environment part. Next, if you have high baseline strength, so that means before you even start working out, you're already stronger than most people, then obviously that puts you in Hanma genetics, and that's a sign that you're going to build muscle fast. And mainly because it shows that you are able to recruit your high threshold motor units better than most people, which obviously is going to give you an advantage in resistance training. Next, if you have high androgen receptor sensitivity or density, that is in broadly genetics. Next to myostatin, like I always say, that is by far the most important thing when it comes to muscle growth. It's not your testosterone levels, it's not your insertions, it's not all the other stuff. At the end of the day, muscle growth boils down to myostatin pathway and the androgen receptor pathway, right? The reason why I always preach testosterone is mainly because I got to keep it simple for you guys. If I say androgen receptor, 90% of people have no clue what I'm talking about. But without the androgen receptor, testosterone is useless. I always use the lock and key analogy, right? Testosterone is the key, the androgen receptor is the lock. And if you have sensitive androgen receptors or short ARCAG repeats, you have a huge advantage in life, because that means that you can have very low testosterone levels and still have a high net androgen status. That's why I get so mad when people are like, oh, hey, look, this person has low testosterone levels, but he looks amazing. I'm like, you idiot. You could have low testosterone levels, but if you have high androgen receptor sensitivity, you're going to look better than somebody who has 1,000 nanogram per deciliter testosterone, but has crappy androgen receptors. And there's obviously other things involved, but I'm going to avoid all the technical talk for now. Next, being resistant to injuries. That's another cheat code that most people don't talk about. If you have strong tendons, good ligaments, good joints, you're resistant to injuries, that's going to take you a lot further than somebody who has amazing genetics but gets injured every other week. So I'm going to put that in Hanma genetics, right? Most people don't know that what separates the best athletes from the worst. It's not all the other things. It's mainly the fact that they have more endurance. They last longer, right? They recover from injuries faster. They heal faster. So definitely a cheat code. Next, having an amazing immune system. That is one of the most underrated things in bodybuilding and fitness in general. And that goes in the broadly saying category. Guys, the first line of defense after a workout is your immune system. There is no muscle growth after training without your immune system. Not to mention the obvious fact that if you're always sick, if you're always getting a cold, if every other week you have to take a visit to the hospital, clearly you're not going to be able to stay consistent on your training program. You're going to have a horrible diet. You're going to have trash energy all the time. That's one of the factors that's so underrated in fitness. But having a strong, powerful immune system is mandatory for building muscle. And sure enough, some of the most jacked people you ever meet rarely get sick. And when they do, they recover insanely fast. To the point that they don't even know that they have an advantage. That, to them, they think it's normal. They have no idea that there are people out there who literally cannot go 1 to 2 months without getting sick. Next, having high baseline satellite cells, myonuclei, that puts you in Hanma genetics, because at the end of the day, testosterone, the androgen receptor, myostatin, all of those things are useless if they cannot contribute to DNA transcription and DNA translation, which ultimately is what muscle growth / protein synthesis is. So the more satellite cells you have at baseline, or the better your ability to increase your satellite cell pool and have them donate their myonuclei to your existing muscle fibers, the more muscle you're going to put on. Next, if you have a high proportion of type 2 fibers / fast twitch fibers, then you are in a Saiyan / broadly genetics category. How big you look, how big you'll eventually get, and how long it'll take until you reach your genetic limit is largely determined by the amount of fast twitch fibers you naturally have. Next, your dopamine receptors, everything that has to do with motivation, positive aggression, And in some cases, again, pain tolerance, which I mentioned earlier, that is in Hanma genetics. Guys, believe it or not, some people are naturally more motivated than others. Some people are naturally more aggressive than others. Some people are naturally more prone to setting goals and going after them. And again, many genes play a role in that, but mostly that's controlled by the amount of dopamine transporters, receptors, and neurotransmitter breakdown enzymes that the person naturally has. Right, you can have all the testosterone, all the androgen receptors in the world, a great immune system, low myostatin, but if your dopamine receptors are trash, if it's hard for you to get motivated, it's going to be hard for you to maximize your muscle building potential. And believe it or not, I know people like that. There's a lot of people out there with great genetics, but who cannot get motivated for shit. They have to use so many tactics and so many tricks just to be able to get up and get themselves to the gym. And trust me, they are so frustrating to work with because they have an excuse for everything. But anyway, next, having a huge appetite. That is so underrated, and that goes at the very top. Saiyan/Bali genetics. Guys, building muscle at the end of the day comes down to having higher protein synthesis than protein breakdown, and being in a caloric surplus over time. And it is so hard to do that if your appetite is trash. So if you naturally have a big appetite, and there are people like that, there are people who could eat 5,000 calories a day and they think it's normal, whereas you have people like us who eat 1,500 calories and we full for the next 2 days. And sure enough, every jack person that I met in my life, every natural jack person, even enhanced, has that one thing in common. That can eat, guys. Sometimes I watch videos and I'm like, wait, how are people doing 10,000 calorie challenge? How can people eat 10,000 calories? Meanwhile, you got some people who tap out at 4,000 calories. No matter what you do, they will throw it up, right? So having a big appetite is a cheat code. Now, obviously, that comes with a downside, which is if they eat too much, they can get fat easily, right? There's an inverted U curve to everything. But again, it's still a cheat code to have when the goal is to build as much mass as possible. Next, having a lot of anxiety, being neurotic, right? Being very prone to negative emotions, being prone to depression. That's obviously NPC genetics, right? That is a horrible genetic trait to have because people that are neurotic, they overanalyze everything, right? The anxiety makes them overthink the most basic things. They program hop, they can't stick to anything. They ask a billion questions when the answer is usually the simplest thing. But the good thing is being neurotic is, like all things, part genetic, part environment. So there's always something you could do about that. But yeah, that's definitely NPC genetics if you are naturally neurotic. Next, if you naturally run fast, if you're a naturally fast guy, again, I'm going to put that in Hanma genetics simply because that's a sign that you have high proportion of fast twitch muscle fibers. And it's also a sign that you have high androgen receptor sensitivity because testosterone plays a huge role in force production, which is ultimately what leads to speed. Right, combined with the right leverages and insertion and all that stuff. But anyway, next, having good IGF-1 receptors, everything in the DNA translation pathway. So that's mTOR signaling, anything in that pathway, the DNA translation pathway. Obviously, that's Saiyan genetics because you cannot build muscle without mRNA translation. And that's mainly regulated by the IGF-1 receptor /PKA/mTOR/P70S6K pathway. Next, if you have a good actinin 3 profile, right? So either RR or RX, that's going to put you in the Hanma genetics category. If you don't know what actinin 3 is, you should know if you watch my videos, but if not, look it up. It's pretty much a protein that is inside your muscle fibers that helps contribute to force production, that helps reduce muscle damage after training. It's also called the sprinter gene for a reason, right? Because most elite sprinters have the optimal version of the actinin 3 gene, right? And obviously, so do most West African descendants. Now, again, you can still build muscle if you have the XX version. You can still get jacked. It's just going to take a bit longer and it's going to be a bit harder. Next, having a fast metabolism, that goes in Hanma genetics, right? It's very similar to people with a big appetite. They tend to have a fast metabolism, right? So another thing they have in common is they tend to sweat a lot, right? They'll go for a 10-minute workout and their shirt will be drained. Now, of course, different things play a role in that, but it's usually linked to having a fast metabolism, having good thyroid function, good T3, low reverse T3. That is a great genetic trait to have if your goal is to build muscle fast. If not, as always, you can manipulate your diet and your training in order to increase the amount of T3 you produce to overcompensate for your shit thyroid hormone genetics. Next, having high baseline muscle mass, right? Having a lot of muscle mass before you even start lifting. And obviously, I use Phil Heath because this was so jacked before he even started bodybuilding. But obviously, that goes in Saiyan broadly genetics. I don't need to explain why. If you're already jacked before you even pick up a weight, and there's a ton of people like that, then you starting the game right before the boss fight with half of your weapons already equipped, right? So these guys are obviously going to have an advantage in bodybuilding and in muscle growth. Next, if you're naturally good at endurance sports, whether that's running, even MMA, it doesn't matter. Anything that requires having good cardiovascular function, obviously that goes in genetics. People think for some reason that being naturally good at endurance means you're going to have a hard time building muscle. Not really, right? Unless you screwed in other departments. It's actually going to help you build muscle because you have great cardiovascular function, you have great blood flow, and you have a great immune system. It is very hard to be a good endurance athlete if your immune system is trash. So being good at endurance, although that might mean that you nerfed in the fast twitch fiber department, again, depending on the person, it comes with a lot more benefits than most people think. I've seen a lot of endurance athletes go from being frail, skinny looking to jacked out of their mind when they transition to bodybuilding. A lot of my Kenyan brothers have that in common as well. One day you see them, they look like Smeagol. You come back in 3 years when they transition to bodybuilding and they look like Baki. And I'm like, how did you do that? So do not underestimate the genetic advantage of being naturally good at endurance sports. Next, being able to recover faster. These are people who recover extremely fast from training, extremely fast from injuries. I mean, you would think they have Wolverine's healing factor. Obviously, that's going to go in saiyan/broadly genetics because they'll be able to accumulate more volume over time, more frequency over time without having to be nerfed by muscle damage and the fatigue it produces. And it also means that they have a great immune system since the immune system is at the very foundation of recovery. Next, your bone structure. So that's your clavicle length, your waist size, the size of your wrists. Believe it or not, that actually goes in the basic category. Because the only thing that does is it makes the muscle that you actually build look better. So if you're a competing bodybuilder, you're in physique, having the optimal weight structure is going to give you a huge advantage. But it's not going to help you build more muscle than the next person, right? It's just going to make the muscle that you already built look better. The only time your bone structure matters is at the extreme. So if you're very, very lanky, then obviously that's going to take you forever to build a great physique. And if you're very, very stocky and short, then the reverse applies, right? It also plays a big role in strength because your leverages are going to be optimized or compromised depending on your bone structure. But when it comes to building muscle, there is not a strong correlation between your bone structure and the amount of muscle that you can build, except at the extremes. Don't forget that, because obviously the bigger you are, the bigger your bone structure, the more muscle you could put on. And obviously the smaller you are, the less muscle you could put on. But that does come with the benefit of filling out your frame quicker, right? So again, there's a lot of it depends when it comes to bone structure. But if you're going to go into bodybuilding, then this will be at the top of the list because bodybuilding is mainly illusion, the illusion of size and having that V taper, or nowadays the X taper. So next, if you have androgenic features, so very masculine features from head to toe, Giga Chad type shit, right? You got the perfect jawline, you got the clavicles, you got the small waist, you got, pretty much everything that makes someone look like a Giga Chad clone. Obviously, that goes in the saiyan/broadly genetics category, right? This person is going to have, on average, the ability to put on muscle as fast as possible. Why? Because having androgenic features is a reflection of your androgen receptor sensitivity and or the amount of testosterone levels you produce naturally. And remember, testosterone is needed to upregulate follistatin, which is the number one myostatin blocker. And last but not least, in fact, the most important predictor that you have great muscle building genetics is if you were able to play elite level football, whether it's at the high school level or the college level or the NFL. If you're able to play American football or rugby at the elite level, then that is the ultimate sign that you have elite saiyan/broadly genetics, both on offense and on defense. The only exception is maybe 2 or 3 positions like kicker, punter, or even quarterback. But so if you are able to play high level receiver, cornerback, linebacker, tight end, and most importantly, running back, you have elite muscle building genetics. I always tell you guys, you want to find the best muscle building genetics in the world, look at American football or look at rugby. It is the only sport in the world where in order to excel, you have to have high androgen receptor sensitivity, high baseline testosterone, Wolverine healing factor, fast twitch/type 2 fibers, low pain sensitivity, high aggression, high dopamine receptors, crazy immune system, huge appetite. Every factor at the top of this list applies to elite football players. And it's not even close. These guys build muscle so fast that some of them actually have to be careful not to put on too much muscle. Let that sink in. Imagine being so genetically blessed that your worry is putting on too much muscle. And sure enough, when you look at professional bodybuilding, a lot of the bodybuilding legends actually played high level football in high school or college. In fact, a lot of them were not even good enough to make it to the NFL because they were lacking some of the factors here. So long story short, you want to find genetic freaks, go look at the NFL. All right, guys, hope this video helps. Don't forget to like and subscribe and grab a copy of the ebook if you want to support the channel. I'm out of here.